Hello and hopefully welcome back to my mini-series about the Apple III. If you made it so far, thank you very much for your patience. I hope you enjoyed the videos I have provided to you so far. It was a big pleasure for me to prepare all this video and audio. In the conclusions, I will do a lot of talk and have less to show you. So I decided to put in the background The Game of Life from John Conway. So, what did we learn so far? The Apple III was introduced in 1980. So again, happy 40th birthday Apple III. The Apple III was intended to be the successor of the Apple II. Back then, the computers which were introduced into the market had a very short life, 1 or 2 years. The Apple II was already running for a couple of years, and everybody thought, well, maybe another 1 or 2 years we get out of it, and then it will be gone, and we need something for the next generation. The Apple III was designed as a business computer for small and medium companies. This was a smart move because it was visible by everybody that smaller companies and even larger companies had picked up a lot of interest in these little computers, these personal computers. So if you remember, VisiCalc was a revolution. Everybody wanted to have the VisiCalc. VisiCalc was the booster for the Apple II. You brought an Apple II with VisiCalc if you were a bookkeeper, so because it made your life so much easier. And of course, the Apple III was designed to handle large data compared to the Apple II, right? The whole system was built for mass storage devices. Remember the profile drive. The profile drive was designed for the Apple III. And if you compare this to the Apple II, which was more like a disk-based system, so there was not really even, I mean, later, yes, but in 1980, nobody thought about to put in a huge hard drive or so accessible from the Apple II. On the other hand, the first batch of the Apple IIIs had issues. The first batch was around 15,000 units. And we talked about it. The clock, which was announced to be built into the Apple III, wasn't working. That wasn't Apple faults. Their supplier had a problem to supply reliable clock chips. Apple did a mistake and didn't check for that. They did not do any incoming quality check, which is nowadays standard. They just relied on that these chips would work, and they put it in their computers. They wouldn't work for long and had failures. So they had to remove the clock chip. The computers were reported to be dead on arrival, or they failed shortly after delivery. We talked also about that. That was this famous lift 3 inches and drop. Yeah, there are a lot of things about this which I personally would question. I believe stories that there was a problem in soldering in the factory and they had shorts, but those things were catched during the final tests on the computers. They had problems with reworking their computers a lot. This lift 3 inches and drop could be because also in the assembly process, maybe chips were not seated right and they got then later failures. Anyhow, I think the biggest problem was the faulty connectors in the RAM board. They changed this. They changed the whole RAM board from the 12-volt system to the 5-volt system. So it was a big problem for the first batch, but they fixed it. Now, some other information about the Apple III I haven't mentioned before. The project was named Sarah, and that is the name of Dr. Wendell Sanders' daughter. And also the SOS was originally called Sarah's operating system. They made then the sophisticated operating system out of that when they went into the market, which is totally usual. You give your development projects some, I would say, nicknames, and when you go into production, they get renamed. That's even today you do this. Then the Apple III was cancelled in September 1985. So from 1980 to 1985, it was sold by Apple. A total of 120,000 Apple IIIs were sold. In comparison, that is nothing, because the Apple II was sold 78,000 times in 1980, 180,000 times in 1981, and by 1984, Apple had sold over 2 million Apple IIs. That is in comparison to the Apple III. Yeah, you can see the Apple III wasn't a commercial success. Then other things which I call rumors, and this is my personal take on it, that the chips were coming out of their sockets due to excessive heat. I have a background in semiconductor business. I design chips. I build chips. I was also involved in testing chips for reliability and so on. There is a test which every IC maker does on his ICs, and that is a HAST test. HAST stands for High Accelerated Stress Test. And these chips are tested at temperatures which can go up to 130 degrees Celsius, which is 266 degrees Fahrenheit. And chips jumping out of their sockets is not a problem. And the HAST test is really, you heat them up, you cool them, you heat them up, you cool them. You put a lot of humidity in the room. I mean, it's a stress test. And I've never seen any problems that a technician reported to me, oh, the chips were jumping out of the sockets. Now, I can be wrong, because the technology in the 1980s is quite different from the technology we had the last 20, 30 years. And they had also a steep learning curve ahead of them. So I don't want to say it's completely bogus, but yeah, I can't see really that as a problem. The connector to the RAM board, yeah, I see it. If somebody tells me they haven't seated the chips in the sockets in the factory correctly, I can see this also, that this gives problems. And hey, back then, mass production of computers wasn't that of a common thing. There were still a lot of startups competing in that market. Apple was the greatest at that time. Well, I own my Apple III for about 15 years now and had never to reseat any of my chips. But my Apple III is the second series, I would say, the 5-volt Apple III. I did also do some temperature measurements inside the Apple III, and actually I haven't seen any super excessive heats. It was about 60 to 70 degrees Celsius. Remember, I showed you this big power resistor on the 5-volt board? Yeah, this thing gets so hot you burn your finger if you touch it. But again, this is not that high temperature for an IC. ICs don't disintegrate at 70 degrees Celsius. They get problems when you exceed something 150 to 200 degrees Celsius. That is important to know when you do soldering of chips, that you don't make them too hot. But normal operating in the 60-70 degrees range, no, that is not harming any IC. Well, if anyone has one of the first 14K apples with a 12-volt system, and he can do some tests and show evidence that really that the ICs can lose their hold in the sockets and jump out. I mean, that would be highly appreciated if you could share this with us. Up to then, I would say I would be a little bit cautious if that wasn't be more some rumors which were brought into the market from competitors of Apple about the Apple III. Because one thing is for sure, IBM did notice that there is somebody coming out with a business computer, and a year later, after the introduction of the Apple III, there was a IBM 5150, and IBM rushed it really. I mean, this computer was designed in 40 days, the base mainboard, and so I mean they knew, hey, somebody is going into the business market with PC computers, and they did act. So that is also another thing. Was the Apple III a failure? Financially, yes. I heard numbers from 68 to $130 million, which Apple would have spent on the project. I estimated they made probably only $25 million profit. So easy calculation. That was a big loss. They did also tax off writings. So yeah, there is absolutely no discussion about it. Financially, that was a big failure. But this is normal in the business world. Not every project is doing as expected. And luckily for Apple, the Apple II sales went on, and they were never in danger to get bankrupt with the Apple III. Not like with the Macintosh, or when they did then in the in the 90s their efforts with these gray beige boxes which had no soul, were not even looking like apples. That was really much more dangerous. The Apple III wasn't putting the company in danger. It put a dent into the universe of Steve Jobs because he wasn't invincible anymore. This was really a failure, and over time you also have to understand everybody who was involved in the project tried to distance himself from the project because they saw it wasn't working as good as they all thought. So nobody wanted to have it on his shirt that he was involved with a failure. So everybody was running away, and nobody really was taking care about the Apple III. When IBM came out with their IBM PC, that was also a very, very stiff competition. IBM back in the time was a huge company, and in the business world, a company with an almost legendary reputation. Everybody said it's a no-brainer to buy IBM equipment. And if IBM comes out with a PC, I take no risk. I can buy an IBM PC. So with Apple having a bad start with the Apple III in the beginning, and they couldn't really build more software and push it more deeper in the market, yeah, the Apple III was simply done. So, what was left of the Apple III? Well, the SOS, the SOS operating system, was definitely the father of the ProDOS, as I said before. And the ProDOS served as an operating system for the Apple II line into the mid-1990s. So all this software was transported to the Apple II. We saw also things like Apple Works have their roots in the Apple III. On the hardware side, the Apple III monitor, which you can see here, was still used on Apple IIs. It was a very good monitor, so they sold it and Apple II owners bought it. The profile drive was pretty much a must-have for every Lisa owner. The Lisa itself wasn't a big success, but the Lisa got the profile drive. The Apple III was for sure a very capable computer for its time. The problem was the lack of software. Compared to the Apple II, there was not much there. Even if you are a business user, you had some better option in the Apple II world. A more advanced Apple II emulation modus would have probably solved it right away, but Apple marketing opted against it. They were fearful that the Apple III could cannibalize the Apple II sales. I can't really follow this argument because for first of all, how can a $3,000 computer cannibalize a $1,000 computer system? People wouldn't say, I throw my Apple II in the trash, I go for the Apple III and pay 3 times more for it. But on the other hand, business users which want to have access to Apple II software which was available maybe would have opted for the Apple III, especially when the Apple II emulation would have had then access to the more advanced features of the Apple III. I know you could see it on both sides, but in hindsight, you always have the easier talk. Another thing is, even if the Apple III would have cannibalized the Apple II system, I don't have proof for it, but I would expect the Apple III had higher profit margins. So, hey, that would be even better. Well, anyhow, nowadays the Apple III is branded as Apple's first big failure, which it is, but it was not a bad computer. I never had an Apple III or heard about an Apple III in the 80s or 90s. But when I saw one early 2000s on eBay, I bought it and I was immediately fascinated with the system. I really like the system. I think it's a computer on its own. I don't compare it to my Apple IIs. I don't say it's much better than the Apple II, but it is an own computer. I don't want to miss it. It has a fascinating operating system, fascinating hardware. I just showed you a glimpse of everything. We could spend 10 times the time I've spent on these videos to show just the hardware development. It's really fascinating. So overall, I think, yes, the Apple III was a commercial failure, but it was not a bad system. I think it is a great system, especially when you look at it through the eyes of 1980. So with these words, I want to conclude my mini-series. Thank everybody who has watched it, and I look forward. I plan to make more videos about my Apple IIs. I have also extensive collection which I gathered through the years of pocket calculators. So I will put all this sooner or later up to YouTube, and I hope I can entertain also other people than just me with it. Thank you very much, and see you soon.